Now, 6:05. You're listening to Good Morning Scotland with Gary Robertson and Laura Maxwell. Now, the Office for Budget Responsibility says UK households are facing the biggest drop in living standards since records began. That's despite the measures announced by the Chancellor in yesterday's spring statement. We'll be looking at those impacts throughout this morning's programme. But what does it mean for businesses first and foremost? Let's hear from Stuart Patrick, who's CEO of the Glasgow Chambers of Commerce. Good morning to you, Stuart.
Good morning.
Now, an awful lot of people will be focusing on what it means for their households in terms of national insurance thresholds, fuel duty announcements, perhaps income tax. What was in the statement for businesses?
Well, the Chancellor lowered expectations in advance. He said he couldn't solve every problem, and I'd have to say so it proved for businesses facing inflationary pressures from every angle. So I would say that there were some positives in the statement, in that employment allowance was increased on NIC charges, but that's really only for a minority of particularly smaller businesses. Fuel duty will have its benefits for the business community, and some promises in the future on business investment support, R&D tax credits and apprenticeship levy reviews, because those haven't been seen to be working terribly well, but not really terribly much on tackling the inflationary pressures. And I'd say our British Chambers of Commerce quarterly economic survey was saying, the last survey was saying that 77% of businesses are really quite worried about inflationary pressures, and there wasn't very much in the statement to help them.
Well, let's talk about a couple of those positives that you mentioned there. How important was the increase in the employment allowance for national insurance for smaller businesses?
Well, I suppose it helps those smaller businesses tackle the issue that they're going to face with increasing national insurance contributions that come through in April. But for the vast majority of businesses, it was only 10%, I think, of businesses that will benefit from that employment allowance. It's something it's good to see. But as I say, 90% of businesses will still have to absorb those extra NIC costs coming through in April.
So while many people might be breathing a sigh of relief that the threshold for payments for the national insurance rise has gone up, that won't affect businesses at all. You'll start paying it right at the basic level.
Well, as an employer, you'll still be expected to pay that additional employer's percentage that's coming through in April. As I say, for the vast majority, for some of the businesses, that employment allowance raises the threshold for them too. But I have to say, it's only for a minority of businesses.
What did you make of the cut to fuel duty? That must help some businesses along the line.
Well, it will, but I think in the greater context of the scale of fuel duty and VAT and on various costs involved with transport, that it'll be a modest. It's a helpful contribution, but it's a modest contribution when you're actually looking at the kind of inflationary pressures, because it's not just fuel. Look at the supply chain problems that businesses have been facing from shipping and from raw material costs, especially since the war in Ukraine began. We've got interest rate rises. We've had 3 since December. We've got labour cost pressures because of the drop in available candidates, and we've got those energy costs increases, sometimes 2 to 3 times the previous costs that businesses were bearing.
What would you like to have seen him do, though, to help a lot of those measures? Because they're global measures that perhaps he can't do anything about, some of them.
Well, 2 things he could have done is he could have delayed the NIC increases that are coming in April. And we were asking, as a British Chambers, we were asking for him to look at the possibility of having energy price caps for small companies in the same way that there are caps for households. Small companies don't get that kind of financial support when their energy costs come through. And that was something we were asking him to look at.
Why do you think he didn't?
I think it's down to the overall macro decisions that he wanted to make about retaining as much flexibility in the future for the overall budgets for the UK. So I can't answer the question why he didn't respond to our issue on SME price caps.
Fair point. But is there any indication that he will deal with it in October?
None at this stage. I guess the comments he's made about needing to improve business investment, and that is definitely the case, because the pressures that businesses are facing from inflation will either go through in price rises to customers, or there's going to be reductions in investment. It can't really be much else than that. And so making promises about reviewing how business investment will be supported when he comes back in the autumn is one area where we'll continue to suggest that kind of measure I've just just mentioned would be helpful.
The Chancellor has said in the past that he doesn't want employees to ask for inflation matching pay rises, but is there inevitable pressure on employers to have to pay more?
Well, that, yes, is the answer to that. There is a lot of movement in the labour market. It's very evident in my own patch in Glasgow that folks are seeing a lot of retirements and a lot of younger people moving between jobs. And it's at that point when you're looking for the replacement that the wage pressure really comes through. So the answer is yes.
What are you seeing at the moment? What sort of inflationary rises are you seeing?
Well, broadly, it's nothing like the sort of levels of inflation that you're seeing from energy or from raw material costs. But, it's not unusual to find yourself having to add £10,000 a year to a salary of 30,000, 40,000 in order to get a decent candidate in areas like digital, for example.
Stuart, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. Stuart Partick there, who is CEO of Glasgow Chambers of Commerce. I just said Stuart Partick, it's Stuart Patrick.